All right, so I'm gonna cover real quick the different ergonomics of these different bikes. Naked, standard sport, super sport. This is something that typically when you see online, people discuss the engine differences more than the actual ergonomics, or you'll just hear that one is more aggressive or less aggressive than the other. So I figured it'd be easier and hopefully do some online shopping as well and help you better narrow down what you're looking for to hear the actual and see the actual differences lined up next to each other. So I'll start with the biggest difference is going to be the handlebars. So how you compare handlebars on a bike is you're going to, let me move this up a little, make sure that shows. Not great with the sun here, but you're going to go from here and you're going to run a line across the seat. So this is a great way to compare the aggressiveness of the handlebars on bikes when doing your window shopping online. And this is a fantastic way to really compare, you know, say MT-07 versus the, say the GSX 8S or something. And typically the classes are going to be pretty similar, but this is one of the best little tips and tricks you're going to find for online shopping. So you're going to run a line from here to here. And if this is visible, we're at about a foot difference between the handlebar and the seat position. That's pretty standard across nakeds. Most of these are going to be about, give or take, 10 to 12, maybe 13-inch difference between here and here. On your standard sport, if we run the difference between there and there, we're going to be looking at here. Now granted, these bikes are sloped, so my hand's going to be moving uphill. And I know that's going to look really dumb with this kind of fisheye on the video, but take my word for it. From here to here, right? And it's about a 6-inch difference on the standard sports. Your standard sports are going to be your fared mid-sized bikes these days. This is a Ninja 650, CBR 650R, R3, R7 is going to be closer to the Super. Who are some others that are RS 660? Anything that's a fared mid-sized bike these days that's not a 600 is typically going to fall in this class. So these are all going to be about a halfway point, 6 inches between the naked and the standard sport. Then if we come over to the super sport, let me straighten my handlebars a little. We are going to be looking at from here to here, 0 inches. This is in line with my hip. So notice down at your hip. Where this makes a huge difference with your actual handling in the bike itself is, one, the higher the handlebars, the more likely you are to keep a healthy, loose grip. This is something that is kind of underappreciated on nakeds, especially for newer riders. And also, the higher those handlebars are, the closer in line it's going to be with your actual shoulder joint itself. And it's going to be easier to push and to use big muscles to control it, rather than kind of what people fall into is they try and use their whole body to turn because they're pushing down on their bars. So with these bars being up, you are going to have no other way but to push them properly. So that's a huge advantage for beginners. The standards being that midway point, huge advantage there in that you get the comfort. And in my opinion, they feel much more akin to a naked. However, they are sportier in feel and in look, which is a huge bonus for a lot of people. And then you have your supers, those low set handlebars. And this is where these are extremely useful, is picture where you see the guys hanging off their bikes. So, remember what I just said about your shoulders being the pivot point and your shoulders being the things that control it. When you hang off your bike, when your shoulders get down low, those clip-on handlebars are now right in line with your shoulder joint. It makes a big difference in terms of your fine tuning while manipulating your weight. But that's a whole nother level, and you know, so on and so forth. Now, the next biggest thing, and this is something I don't see talked about very often, is going to be the tank and the seating position on nakeds. And I'm sorry my bike is dirty. I would promise you I'd wash it, but I won't. So tank seating position. On nakeds, you are almost always going to be sitting towards the back of the seat. Let me actually double check my camera real quick. Okay, you're going to be sitting closer towards the back of the seat. This is, all of them are going to have a thing right here that's going to be a wall. And now notice as well the actual where my hips are going to be, as well as the bike. So it's about this far of a difference. Just keep that in mind. We're looking at about this far. So when you're sitting farther back, you are going to be in a more stable position with your butt, and it's going to have this to push against you. So when you accelerate, you're not going to need to rely on other body parts and muscles to keep you on the bike. You aren't going to have to hold on to the handlebars if you're riding it properly. This will brace you very well. This is another huge bonus for keeping your suspension stable the newer you are, and especially if you're getting a faster bike for the first time. Extremely, extremely underrated bonus to nakeds is that these seats, the way they're designed, are going to be more beginner friendly to keeping your suspension stable. Next, the tanks are skinnier. So these tanks on almost all nakeds, minus the fastest of 1000s and 1000 pluses, are going to have skinnier tanks than either of the other two categories. And if you were to compare CC to CC for the bikes, every single one of them is going to have a skinnier tank. And the reason for that is it's typically speaking more comfortable, and you're not you're not going to be hooking your leg around these things in the same way. And even though people do, and it looks awesome, these bikes are meant to be ridden differently. They're built for the road. So sitting farther back in a more comfortable position is not, that's your goal. These bikes were not built with hanging off in mind. So skinnier tank, more comfortable. And it also will allow you more actual adjustability depending on your height and everything with how much it splays your leg, which is a big thing, big thing, depending on your age, your hip mobility, your actual hip flexibility and leg flexibility. Extremely underrated. And if this is something too, that all cruisers are very skinny through the middle, and it's because it's more comfortable. You'll never sit on a Harley that your legs are splayed wide like this. Enough rambling there. Super Sport. God, why do I keep doing that? Standard Sport. Same deal. It's going to have a wall where you can sit backwards. But, and this is a big but here, these tanks are all going to be wider. This does give you the benefit if you want to hang on your bike. You can start to do that more easily and properly on these bikes. So class for class, the standard sports are going to have a wider tank. So if you were to take an MT-03 versus an R3, that R3 is going to have a wider tank. It does give you more capability in that sense. But you also get the benefit because they're very skinny back here. If you're sitting all the way back in a more comfortable position, you still get the benefit of that close, skinny tank, which is just more comfortable for cruising around. Now we come to the monstrosity. Now remember where I mentioned that width earlier with the handlebars? So let's compare now the width here. This is the most stretched out position by far. This tank, if you can see this, is absolutely huge in comparison. It is a monster of a tank. This goes to 600 cc's as well. Any super sport is going to have a much wider tank. And this is something to keep in mind because you are also going to be sitting farther forward on these things. So you're going to be sitting within your either nuts to tank, a half fist, a fist and a half. You're going to be sitting closer because you have to brace yourself with this tank with your legs. You have to squeeze that tank. The other bikes have that wall set up to where you don't have to brace yourself with your legs. This bike, if you were to sit all the way back here, and maybe if you're a really tall dude, you may be able to do it. You're gonna look silly. But if you were to sit all the way back here, and that it would be ungodly uncomfortable for one, and two, you would have no control over this bike. These bikes were designed, and they're skinny through here, right? So hopefully this shows skinny through here, and they get wide, and it's so you can hook, and they have a better ability to hold onto that tank as well as to manipulate your body weight on them. That is something to keep in mind as well. If you are someone who, and this goes back to the fitness of these bikes, if you have bad hips, if you have bad, and bad hips will lead to bad back, anything of that sort, that wide tank can quickly become a regrettable purchase. Even if that position, you're able to sit in this position comfortably, that wide tank is something that you don't see people complain about online a lot, but I know many people, especially older guys, who they rode super sports when they were younger, and now it's too much of a hindrance for them to continue with. Next, and this will be our last major difference I cover here, is going to be your foot peg. So I will put a little note here. KTMs have the most rear set foot pegs of any nakeds. Typically speaking, if you're to go shop for any other naked, this foot peg is going to be about 3 inches more forward. So it would be more in line with this nut right here. Anyway, here to here. But we're gonna run it as it is right now, because it still shows what, pretty similar to what a naked's gonna look like. Look at your peg. So like if you're online shopping, look at your peg and run it up the middle of the seat. And keep in mind with where your butt would be sitting on this bike, right? So this is a naked, I'm gonna be sitting farther back on it. That peg is going to be forward of my hip joint. And then how forward of your actual hip is going to be the angle and the forwardness of that peg. And the more forward it is, the more comfortable it is. So if you move that about 3 inches more this way, you can see very quick, like we move back to the nut, right? It's very far forward. That's going to be like the GSX 8S. Very forward pegs on those relative to some others. It's going to feel very comfortable and kind of stretched out, so to speak. Then we go to our standard sport, and these pegs are going to be, these are on much more of a bike by bike basis, but we run this one. This is a more forward set peg than that KTM. But if this peg was the same as your standard, or excuse me, the KTM was more like your standard naked, these pegs are almost identical to all nakeds. So it's running forward of the back end / where your hip joint is going to be. Difference is, with these sports, or with these standard sports, you do have the ability to sit nuts to tank if you're really playing with things. And that peg will be, they're all set up, as far as the ones that I've played with anyway. They are all set up to where if you're nuts to tank, that peg gives you enough leverage to push off of and make things to where you can ride them harder. The pegs on these are, pegs on bikes are extremely underrated in how much thought goes into them, in my opinion. They're one of the more fascinating things on bikes, and this, this is one of them. Is all of these bikes have this in mind. If you're to sit nuts to tank, this peg will give you the ability to push against it and keep your thighs and everything in line with that bike. Anyway, so we run this one up, right? It's more forward. This is a more forward peg than the KTM. It's a very comfortable peg. Now, if we go to our Super Sport, I'm gonna double check my camera before I keep yapping here. Here's my peg, and we run that up the seat. Now remember where I said you're gonna be nuts to tank. Make sure we're showing nuts to tank, half fist, fist, fist and a half. Wherever you are, your actual hip is gonna be either right over that peg, or it's going to be left of that peg. So, or it's not left of that peg. Your hips are going to be in front of that peg, which gives you that ability to push off the peg, which is so important for keeping that proper clamp and hip strength around this massive tank, and for allowing everything that these bikes are able to do. And another quick note as well, you hear people talk about the peg height. Now, Gixxers are pretty middle of the road as far, well, they're probably one of the higher pegs now, given the Ducatis have lowered theirs. BMWs are, I would say this is about dead average as far as super sports go for peg height. So if we compare our seat to our peg, right, this is about this high. This is something that I think people are a little dramatic about. And if we come here, so hopefully that shows, it's about a 3-inch difference in peg height. That's not near as drastic as people will try and tell you about these bikes. I point that out because it's the rearward set that makes them feel higher, because your actual knees themselves have to get higher to get on that peg. So if you hear, you know, a peg is higher or lower, typically it's someone who is not understanding that a peg is more rearward than they're thinking it is. So that's the basics of the ergonomics. The nakeds are going to be the most beginner friendly for slow speed maneuvers, for riding on the road, for pretty much everything. Nakeds are the most forgiving, they're the most comfortable. They are going to give you way more pros than they are cons. The sports are going to be extremely comfortable. They're going to feel more akin to a naked. They are going to give you a better options as far as the tank and the ergonomics themselves. You are able to play with manipulating your weight on these things better and easier than you can a naked. Really the biggest drawback to these things is the fact that they have the plastics. If you're brand new and you buy a bike with plastics and you drop it, it's going to hurt your soul and your wallet if you have to get it fixed. Nakeds can be dropped off mountains and no one would be the wiser. Sports are not quite as tough. Then we have our super sports. These bikes are a completely different beast when it comes to comfort and everything, really. The biggest thing I would say about these is really consider where you live. All of the benefits that come from these more forward, aggressive ergonomics are completely moot on straight roads. If you live somewhere that you don't have windy roads to go on at any point, really consider if this type of bike is worth it for you, because the actual ergonomics have no benefits for the street. Zero benefits for the street. And this is something that I think is kind of misunderstood and overplayed by the go fast suicide riders on the interstate that you see. Not to diss on them, their stuff's fun to watch, but don't be them. So yeah, hopefully this will give you a better idea on how to do some window shopping and understand bike ergonomics in and of themselves and see the differences of the classes. Really, the biggest take home here is going to be when you're looking for aggressiveness, run that line. You're shopping online and stuff. Run that line from the handlebar over the seat. All bike manufacturers will have a picture set up with the bike standing straight up, every single one of them, from the side. Run a line, and that will tell you how high up or down that handlebar is, and then get a look for that peg and run a line straight up. And it will tell you what you are doing and what you're looking at as far as the ergonomics go. Tanks, you can't really get a feel for from pictures. Seats, all of that, you have to see those in person, but those two are typically enough to help you narrow down what you're looking for if you've been shopping before. So yeah, any questions, please ask. I hope this helps someone. I hope this kind of gives some people a better perspective on the ergonomics side by side, rather than just hearing aggressive, comfortable, forward, rear, high, low, whatever you typically see. Because a lot of times those descriptions, I think, are inaccurate of the bike. So yeah, thank you.